Every Filipino becomes a nurse or an animator. We know there are a lot of Filipino nurses in America due to the mass number of Western nursing schools in the Philippines, but many Filipinos living in America have found success in the animation industry because of the sheer number of Western animation studios and schools in the Philippines. From Finding Nemo, to The Incredibles, to Inside Out, Filipinos helped write, direct, and animate these movies and other beloved classics. The iconic tear-jerking opening scene from Up was created by a Filipino, Ronnie Carmen, a story supervisor for the film. He wrote the sequence where old Carl reminisces over his late wife Ellie, and based a lot of Carl's personality and mannerisms on his Filipino father, who was in hospice and could no longer speak. Yet, while our culture and families serve as animators' inspirations, there aren't any characters we can point to as explicitly Filipino. So how come we don't see more Filipino protagonists in animation? Are slight references to Filipino culture enough to count as quality representation? And why have Filipinos spent decades writing stories for other communities, but have little to no opportunity writing from their own perspective? I'm Trese, and here's what you missed on the Chismis, presented by Kumu. Unlike live-action films and TV shows that are known to be lacking in representation, animation has long been a pioneer at introducing Filipino culture into the mainstream. Animator Armand Serrano placed paroles in the Christmas sequence of Lilo and Stitch. The Nomanisan Island in The Incredibles 2 was inspired by the Taal volcano in Tagaytay. And the address P. Sherman 42 Wallaby Way from Finding Nemo was intentionally fishermen said in a Filipino accent, an inside joke among the Pixar Pinoy animators, or Pixnoys. Now, we are starting to see representation not just in the background, but in lead characters like Bobby Rubio's Float and Disney's Raya. But can people even tell that these characters had Filipino influences? Unless you search it up yourself or follow Bobby Rubio on Twitter, you might not have known that the leads were Filipino. And while Raya does technically represent all of the Southeast Asian countries, most of the voice actors are East Asian, and the directors are not even Asian. The question we have is, why couldn't Disney create a distinctly Filipino protagonist, like they had chosen in Coco or Mulan? Now, Float, Raya, and even Disney's recent Christmas ad have undeniably opened important doors for us, especially since these are the first times we've seen an intentional effort to put Filipino characters and culture in the mainstream. But now, we need to ask, how do we grow from here? Well, if we look at why big studios have produced stories about specific cultures or people, they tend to be based on pre-existing tales. For example, the majority of Disney princesses have prior fairy tales associated with them. Beauty and the Beast, Sleeping Beauty, Frozen, even Mulan. We see this working in our favor with Netflix's new show starring authentic Filipino stories and characters. Based on the popular graphic novel by Filipino writer and artist team Bujet Pan and Kaja Baldissimo, Netflix is producing Trese. The story is set in Manila, where mythical creatures of Philippine folklore live amongst humans. The protagonist, Alexander Trese, will be voiced by Filipino actor Liza Soberano for the Filipino language version of the series, and Filipino-Canadian actor Shane Mitchell in the English version. Not only will it include recognizably Filipino references, but even her character motivations can be seen as innately Filipino traits. So how can we ensure that representation like this continues? And do we always need to rely on studios to greenlight our stories?
Well, not exactly. I'm Sapphire Sandalo, and I'm an animator. May I?
If you're loving this episode and love winning money, we got the show for you. Chismis, the game show, is a weekly interactive challenge where you can win up to $500 by answering 10 questions correctly. And the topics are straight out of these episodes you're watching right now. Click and download the Kumu app, follow @OneDown, and catch us every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Pacific time to play. Now back to the episode.
While big studios have the most opportunity to take representation mainstream, development executives weigh the risks and may not often pick up a storyline that doesn't have mass appeal or has already proven to be marketable. And since we have very few Filipino animation examples, it's much tougher to greenlight these stories. However, the industry is changing as these studios are beginning to take cues from the internet, which has opened up doors for our stories to prove their worth amongst many others. I mean, we've all seen Float on Disney+, but on YouTube, it's racked up more than 60 million views. Take, for example, Hair Love, the Oscar-winning short film that follows the story of an African-American father as he tries to learn how to do his young daughter's natural hair. It's the perfect example of how the internet provides factual data that specific cultural experiences can have mass appeal, which is the opposite of what larger studios may believe at the moment. And here's why independent creators will be key to authentic representation, especially for Filipino stories. No one can tell our stories with the cultural significance and understanding as we can. And we can't wait for studios to miraculously decide that these stories are worth sharing. The future of Filipino representation in animation depends on creators persisting that our stories stay accurate, that we don't whitewash our protagonists or change the setting or alter our experiences to be more palatable. And it also depends on you as the viewer, creating demand for these stories to be told.
So, as we've seen through decades of animated work, the Filipino animators already exist, and the Filipino stories do too. So, representation for us is just a matter of time, and telling our story and waiting for the world to listen.